Welcome to episode 251 of Real Health Radio. You can find the show notes and the links talked about as part of this episode at 7, so the word all spelled out, seven-health.com/251. Before we get started, I just want to mention that I'm currently taking on new clients. I specialize in helping clients to overcome eating disorders, disordered eating, chronic dieting, body dissatisfaction and poor body image, exercise compulsion and overexercising, and also helping clients to regain their periods. So if you want help in any of these areas, or you just want to have a better relationship with food and body and exercise, then please get in contact. You can head over to seven-health.com/help, and there you can read about how I work with clients and apply for a free initial chat. And the address again is seven-health.com/help, and I'll also include that in the show notes. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Real Health Radio. My name is Chris Sandel. I'm a nutritionist that specializes in recovery from disordered eating and eating disorders, or really helping anyone who has a messy relationship with food and body and exercise. And today on the show, it is a guest interview. And today my guest is Michelle Viña-Baltsas. Michelle is a professionally trained coach, facilitator, and certified intuitive eating counselor. For 10 years, she's been coaching women transitioning into midlife, helping them to recreate more peaceful relationships with food, their changing bodies, and movement. Her compassionate approach helps women embrace their true essence beyond unrealistic cultural beauty expectations so they can accept and care for their bodies during this season of life and beyond. So I became aware of Michelle from an episode that she recorded with Summer Inanen on her podcast. And it was a discussion about midlife and aging and how this can affect clients. And considering that many of my clients are at this life stage and that this can impact things like recovery and intuitive eating and hormones and other life changes, I thought it would be great to have Michelle on the show. And if you listen to last week's episode, my AMA show, there were a number of questions about midlife. So I think this conversation is very relevant. So as part of the show, we talk about Michelle's relationship with food and her body and how this has changed over the years and decades, from dieting to binge eating to Overeaters Anonymous to then finding intuitive eating and finally the healing that she was after. And we talk about many of the trainings that Michelle has done and the insights and benefits that she's got from them. So the certified intuitive eating coach training, the playing big facilitator training with Tara Moore, her professional mentorship with Summer Inanen, and grief training with Brie Campos. We also talk about ageism and menopause and hormonal and physical changes, exercise, self-worth, and some of the positives that Michelle has experienced through aging. I really love this conversation, and I think there is plenty to learn from Michelle's life experience as well as the knowledge that she shares. I will be back at the end with a recommendation for you, but for now, let's get on with the show. Here is my conversation with Michelle Viña-Baltsas. Hey, Michelle, welcome to Real Health Radio. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me.
So you are someone who works a lot with clients who are in midlife. And this is an area that I've been working on more and more in the last handful of years. I've kind of been reflecting and just noticing that much more of my clients than really at any other point are now in their late 40s and 50s and 60s. And I think there are things that occur at that point, whether that be things to do with how the body changes, whether that be to do with how life changes, that I think is really relevant and it's useful to have a conversation about. And so that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to have you on the show today. And I also know you have your own background and story with issues around food. And I think it would be great to be able to talk about that as well. And so I guess as a starting place, let's start with you. Like, what was your relationship with food like growing up? Or what are some of your earliest memories connected to food?
Oh, well, that is a loaded question. Food for me was, as a young person, was really challenging. And I remember it being very shameful, filled with a lot of embarrassment. And to be honest, it was also very confusing for me because I was able to, at a very young age, the earliest memories I think are like 4 or 5. And of course, they're just like flashes. They're not fully formed, but they are, there, of just being able to eat quite a bit more than people my age. And one of my earliest memories was asking my parents if I could order off the adult menu and not the children's menu, or the kids menu, because I always felt like I was still hungry. And they looked at me like, no, you're too young to order, an adult size portion, whatever that is. But they wouldn't allow me to. And I remember just feeling really embarrassed, that I felt the need to have more, and I was told that it wasn't okay. So I felt very isolated, and it was hard. It was very hard for me.
And was that also happening at home? So you were at home, and what was then plated up for lunch or dinner was then also not enough for what you needed?
Yes. And food, looking back, was definitely policed. How much food I had, how often I had it. Comments were often made if I, ate, in quotes, too much of something, specifically like, deli meats or things like that. And it all got a little complicated because there was some food scarcity there because of my father had passed away when I was 7. And so my mother was in a difficult financial situation. And so we did have to some degree, I don't want to say ration, but we had to be a little more mindful. And that was hard for me because I was hungry. And my mother was also a medical professional. She was a medical professional and was very into eating, in quotes, balanced meals. And so I have no memory of us ever having, what we say in intuitive eating as fun foods in the house. That was forbidden. So I would go to friends' homes who had all of that kind of stuff, and I'd want to eat it all because I didn't have it. So, there were a lot of things going on. Of course, now as an adult, I can see that. But as a child, it was just, why don't we have these things? It's not fair. I want them. And just feeling all the time like, this is not working for me, and I need more than this. And why am I being made to feel that my hunger is a bad thing? And that, I am not supposed to feel this way. And I'm certainly not supposed to speak about it, especially when, again, we were strapped financially. So it was a very complicated time, very challenging time for me. And I see how it all played out with my food.
Yeah, totally. I mean, was there another incident where you tried to vocalize this to your parents or to your moms? Obviously, you mentioned the issue or the time at the restaurant, but was there another attempt where you tried to explain your side of things?
Yeah, there were. And I specifically remember, deli meats, and my mother just saying, like, how did this pound of blank disappear? I just got this X number of days ago, and just her looking at me like, what is wrong with you? And so saying I was hungry, and just her, her not really understanding that I was hungry, and, please don't look at me that way because I felt like an alien. And it was very, I felt, again, the shame was profound. And I really thought, I got the impression from a very, very young age that having an appetite was a bad thing. And of course, I know now that it's not, but at the time, I didn't have this knowledge. And so that continued to grow as I got older. And so I continued to try to suppress that hunger. And of course, in doing that, that just led to dieting and to, again, continuing to believe that there was something wrong with me, that nobody can eat this much, nobody should eat this much, and that there must be something else, in quotes, wrong with me that I would want to have that much food.
Yeah. Yeah. And it sounds though like that was very much a learned belief. Like even with you just retelling this story, it sounds like in the early part, you notice I have a large appetite, and that's more just an objective fact as opposed to it being a problem. And it's like, how can I just get these adults to understand that that is the case and that there is nothing wrong with this? And then at some point over incidents and years of being kind of shamed and told that this is wrong, whether through actually being told or just the actions of others, then it kind of became internalized of, oh, this is obviously a bad thing.
Right. And even when I'm hearing you say it and when I said it, I'm thinking that I had a large appetite. And that's really a judgment because an appetite is what it is. Right. Yeah. And so, I was judging myself then. And, and again, I think some of that gets into, well, how much does a person need to eat? And the answer is, of course, that varies, day to day. And so hour to hour, it just really depends. So, again, not having that kind of language at that age, it was a completely different time. And my mother was going through a lot. And so this is certainly not any way for me to blame her, but, she certainly didn't have the tools that a lot of parents have now.
Yeah.
At that time, it was, this is what children are only supposed to eat this much. And, you're eating more than that. So that's not normal. And that, of course, was not the case. But that's what I was told.
Yeah. And did she have her own dieting history outside of, I know you said she was in the medical profession, like outside of the medical profession, was her own dieting informing some of her thoughts on this?
Absolutely. My mother was always very critical of her body, especially her belly. That was, as for many women that I coach and just hear, talking is a belly is a big area of contention for a lot of people. And she longed to be a specific weight, and she would give a number all the time. And of course, I wouldn't give the number here, but it was always this magical number that she thought like all of her worries would go away when she was able to reach this number again. Yeah. And, she would often say, well, my body was just so much, blah, 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 when I was this, and she just pined for it all the time. And I just remembered, I remember the number, I remember everything. And my grandmother, although my grandmother didn't quote a weight, she was also very body conscious, and she wore a girdle. And, part of that again was the times, but she also said it was to help her back. But I also remember her putting it on and saying like, oh, look, I look so much in quote better, when I have this on. So she clearly was also very body conscious. Yeah. And they were both very aware when there was a person in a larger body nearby and would call my attention to it. And my mother is from Puerto Rico. And so she would say in Spanish, mira, gorda, which is look, a fat person, and gorda with the A is woman. And so my mother would sort of, as, subtly as she could, sort of like, tilt her head or whatever, so that I would look. And my mother of course, the language didn't exist then, but she was very fat phobic. Yeah. She really had no idea. And, this was a cultural thing because my grandmother was exactly the same way. I was taught at a very young age that being in a larger body was not okay. Yeah. And that my mother went so far as to say that, in her opinion, and again, I know what she was taught because my grandmother said the same thing. It was a result of eating, in quotes, too much. And of course, being out of control, yeah. And a lack of self-care, which again, that language didn't exist, but it was just, again, very young age. These are the things that I was told, yeah. And I internalized them.
Totally. I mean, you just pick those up by osmosis. You pick them up by someone's directly telling those things to you, and that just forms your beliefs. And so when did you start to then do the policing of your own food? So when did you start the dieting?
Well, I remember, let me think. I remember feeling self-conscious about my body as early as 8 years old. So for me, that was third grade.
Yeah.
And that was really because I started to develop. I was already like wearing a training bra when I was in third grade. Nobody else was at that stage. And so my body, I had grown taller. My body was starting to fill in. And it was very emotionally and physically uncomfortable because nobody else was like that. I also had a lot of body hair.
Yeah.
So my on my father's side were Syrian. So I had, and my mother again was Puerto Rican. So there's just this genetic thing where I had more body hair. My mother had almost none, but I had a lot from my dad's side. And so that also made me feel very uncomfortable because I was made fun of all the time. So between that and my body being taller, filling out, developing breasts at 8 years old, 8 and 9, my body was just like, again, what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
Why am I developing earlier than everybody else? And it was just a very uncomfortable period. So I wanted to be smaller. So I started eating a little bit less. And, time I was in sixth grade, which is 11 and 12 years old, I was fully developed. I started menstruating already. And, that of course is when, just in my case, I was attracted to boys. And so I was looking to look like everyone else and be thinner. And my body that wasn't the way my body was designed. And I wasn't in a larger body, again, that varies. Everybody's, a little different, but I was definitely more developed, and that was not okay for me. And so I started to eat less, and I started to be interested in, well, how can I look more like them? Of course, more like them was that they weren't menstruating yet, so their body wasn't going through those changes.
Yeah.
So I was always looking to change my body to look like someone else's. And I didn't look like them for lots of reasons, but specifically around just my body type.
Yeah. And so with the dieting, were you doing this on your own and it was kind of your secret and you didn't tell anyone, or you were telling your mom, or she was encouraging it, or you were doing it with other kids? Like what was your experience?
Well, it was a combination of all of those things. But initially, I was pretty open about it because I wanted people to know that I was doing something to fix myself. Like that was what I believed. So I, like so many people at the time, had joined an organization. I will not say the name. And I would go weekly and I would do my thing and reach a specific weight. And then I would be all better, and I thought in my mind that, well, I'll be at this weight forever now. My problem is, in quotes, fixed, and of course that was not the case. And I was young. I was 12, 13 years old at that point when I started doing this. And so things started to really change for me at that point. And then I started doing it with friends, because then they started to develop and they didn't like their bodies either. So it was like, oh, well, let's do this together. Let's all of us be disordered together, which is typically what happens.
Yeah.
And we all got on the same bandwagon, and we all went to the same meetings, and we all were, in quotes, accountable to one another. And it went from there. And then from there, I tried other diets on my own, all kinds of diets. In fact, one time I'll never forget, when I was in high school, my first year of high school, I was dieting with a teacher.
Wow.
She brought me, she says, oh, well, I would sit there and I would tell her how much I really didn't like my body. And she would say, oh, I have this, blank diet for you, and we'll do it together. Wow. At that point, I was 14 or 15. Yeah. Freshman year. So I would have been, 15 going on 16 the following year. So I was probably 14, 15 at that stage, my freshman year. Yeah. So we dieted together.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so basically at every turn, it is just being reinforced into you of like dieting is normal. This is a good thing for you to do. This is you taking care of yourself. Yeah. I mean, that's just.
And there is something wrong with your body and you need to do something about it.
Yes. Yes. Because even if that's not said explicitly, that is what is being implied.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That was what I believed all the time. And because I wasn't getting the same attention that so many other young people were getting, or at least in my mind, that's what I believed, there was something wrong with me, for sure. Because if there weren't, then men would, at that point, young men would be more attracted to me. So in order to get the male gaze, I would have to change myself. And that was what I continued to try to do.
Yeah. And I've heard you on another podcast, and I know it was part of your story, like this turned into then binge eating disorder. And so how long did it start or did it take before that started to occur?
It's a little fuzzy. And I really think part of that is just because I need to sort of protect myself from some of those memories because they are really painful. But, a little bit of stuff that has shaken out over the years is probably like around, I remember it pretty heavy in high school. So between like 15 and 18, like around that time is when I think it was at its, I don't want to say its height, but it was pretty bad. That's really when I became very aware of how much I actually could consume. And it was hectic and it was hidden and it was shameful. And it was all of the things that we read, about symptoms of bed. And, it was at that time, of course, called compulsive eating.
Yeah.
But I knew that, again, and this time I knew, like, diagnostically, like something was a little off. Like I always felt that way, but as I got older and closer to the end of high school, I was starting to realize that this is a lot, and I meant that because I was so physically uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It wasn't just that I thought, it wasn't just a judgment of how much I was eating. It was my body was so uncomfortable because of the amount of food I was consuming, and yet I couldn't stop. And so there was that compulsiveness there. And that's when I knew I had enough wherewithal to be like, something might be going on here. I don't know what it is. I don't know who to go to help me, but I'm making note of this.
And what did you then do with that note? Like, did that mean that you then did go and find, a psychologist, or you did go and find someone, or what happened as part of that?
Well, I was in therapy all the way through. Like, I remember being in therapy probably from like middle school on, on and off. And when I graduated from high school, I was 18. And I did have some friends who were able to, I was able to share a little bit. And they were like, oh, I eat a lot too. My therapist didn't seem like overly concerned. They certainly didn't have, of course, a very different time again. I mean, I'm 56. So, this was like in the 80s. So, we didn't have the information that we have now about eating disorders. And, I thought my therapists were like, okay, so you have an appetite. I don't know that I was fully clear with them the extent of my eating and the discomfort that I was feeling and the frequency of how often this was happening.
Yeah.
And part of that may have just been shame.
Yeah.
And part of it may have just been, I don't really want to talk about this, because I think part of it was this, if I'm really honest, this is one of my coping tools. Don't take it away from me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there was fear there of, well, if this stops, how am I going to cope then?
Totally. Yeah. And I know that with clients as well. There is this, there can be this ambivalence where it's like, okay, there is this destructive side to this, and I can see what this costs me, and this is unenjoyable in many aspects. And I don't know how to do this without this.
Exactly. It's all I knew. It really was all I knew. And I really thought for years, I think I had a hybrid type of thing. I think I struggled with, in quotes, emotional eating. I definitely was eating very often to soothe my emotions, but there absolutely was binging going on. And I think, again, that was in response to, growing up in a home where there wasn't a lot of food. And when there was, it went very quickly. And I remember I still have visions, especially when COVID hit, was really hard for me because I remembered, just speaking about food scarcity and how, that period of the COVID times, especially when we were in lockdown, really was kicking that up for a lot of people. And I was one of those people because the thought of like not having access to food it opened something up for me that hadn't been opened in many, many years. And I remembered looking at pantry, my mother's pantry, and it being almost empty, like just seeing a few cans, or like things that I didn't want to eat. You know what I mean? It was like, there's nothing here that I really am interested in eating. And looking in the refrigerator, and again, it being very sparse. And just that feeling. So when it came time to shop for COVID, my husband was like, we need to get a new freezer because, you're buying a lot of food. And he wasn't insulting me, but he was, or in any way trying to make me feel shameful. He was being serious and like, okay, I understand you need this. And I understand the reasons why, because we've talked about it. What can we do so that we can help you to not feel like you're going to run out of food? Yeah. This was a very real concern for me. And it kind of shocked me, to be honest, because it had been so many years later. But it's clear that, that was my body was responding to something that it had experienced in the past.
Yeah, it's like a visceral reaction. It's your nervous system taking over. This isn't you like logically thinking, okay, is there going to be enough food in the store? Like your body has taken you there, like to that place before your prefrontal cortex has even come online.
Absolutely. I mean, because I was seeing, photos online of empty grocery store shelves. Yeah. And my husband and I decided that I would do the shopping. Our son was home from college. My husband has had some respiratory issues, so he was at a much higher risk than me. Yeah. So we agreed, and I went once a week. We were very strategic about how we did the shopping. And, I would come home and literally strip down in the laundry room before we knew that, this was in earlier on. It was, we were all like so with good reason. It was a horrifying time. But my point is that he understood and we worked together. But it was seeing those pictures of the empty shelves, not just of toilet products, but of food. Yeah. And then experiencing it when I went to the stores, my nervous system was over the top. Yeah. Yeah. I can completely understand that. And so how did you, like, if we go back to you in your 20s or 30s, like how did this then start to come to an end? Like what are the things that allowed you to get to a better place with this? Well, believe it or not, one of the places that helped me for a period, a chunk of time actually, was going to a 12-step program. Okay. And I think I can say it here.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, Overeaters Anonymous. Yeah. I found when I graduated from college at 21, you had asked before and I noted that my eating seemed to be, a little unique. And throughout college, I definitely, continued along with the binging. And when I left college, I said, okay, now I am free to explore a little bit more. And I was in therapy, but nobody seemed to think that this was much of an issue. But when I left college, I graduated and I said, now that I'm done with school, I have time to explore. And I don't really remember how it came into my life, but I found out about Overeaters Anonymous. And when I went and I heard other people speaking, I felt like I had found my home because I actually spoke to people who described what I had been doing for like 15 years. Yeah. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's not just me.
Yeah.
And people can eat as much as I can eat, and they can eat to a point of incredible physical discomfort and yet still want to eat. And that was me. And so a lot of that shame fell away. And I found a place for myself for a period of time until it no longer was aligned with my beliefs. But for 10 years, I was there. I would say for about 8 years, they were 8 solid years where I felt like I want to do this for the rest of my life. I want to be in this program for the rest of my life. And then I would say years 9 and 10, things started to shift. And it just didn't work for me anymore. I didn't feel comfortable there. I didn't like the way people spoke of their bodies or about food, and it wasn't giving me a sense of freedom anymore.
Yeah.
And that was what I really wanted. And so I knew that it was time to shed myself of that and move on.
Yeah. And look, I've heard similar things from clients as well, where to find a support group where you can talk honestly, where you find other people who have had similar experiences when for so long you felt isolated, like that can feel like just a godsend, and it can be such an incredible thing. And as you said there, in terms of the shame part of it, like to be able to hear other people, to be able to share your story, like I am fully on board with that aspect of Overeaters Anonymous. And I do, like, I think about that in terms of like 12-step programs. I think that is a thing that as a society we need. We need spaces where we can talk very openly and vulnerably and tell our stories about situations and things that we did that we've never told to anyone else, and have people be really supportive and non-judgmental. Like that is fundamentally an amazing thing. My qualms and issues with Overeaters Anonymous is that fundamentally, I think what it is suggesting in terms of these are the things you now need to remove from your foods and your eating, and being pretty much restriction based is where I feel that is the downside, because I think for a lot of people, or I'd even go so far as to say most people, that is at least a part of, and for a lot of people a very big part of, where the binge eating is coming from. And so 100%. It's kind of suggesting more of what has created the problem in the first place. And I think, like you talked about in the beginning, it can maybe feel like more of a solution, and then with time it feels less like a solution, and you start to be like, well, this isn't actually taking this thing away.
Right. Yeah. It was being able to release some of that shame in the rooms and hearing other people speak. Like I said, it really was like, oh, wow, what a relief, Yeah. And then I just wanted to stay, but again, things change, and we evolve if we choose to. And I knew that, it took a while, but it just wasn't working for me anymore. And when I say working, I mean that I didn't feel comfortable and I didn't feel free. I started to feel, like you're describing, more restricted. And I didn't like that. Well, no, you can't, you shouldn't eat that. And the whole thing with, don't eat white foods and all of that. Yeah. And I was like, no. And for a while, I thought I needed to go into like the subgroup of OA, which was even more restrictive. And then I really came to my, what I'm calling my senses, and just realized, Michelle, this is not for you anymore. It's fine for them. People can do whatever they feel is good for them. But for me, this is no longer aligned with what I want to feel, with my values or anything like that. So I chose to leave.
And at the point of choosing to leave, had you already then discovered intuitive eating or had an idea of like what was next in terms of what you would do? Or it's just like, I know this isn't working, and even if I don't have a plan B, I'm getting out?
It was the latter.
Okay.
Yeah, I knew I needed to get out. I didn't have awareness of intuitive eating until much later. Yeah, so I kind of like I just kind of free-formed for like for a while.
Yeah.
And I think during that time, if I'm honest, I am pretty sure I tried some more diets. I know I absolutely was using exercise or movement, as a way to help control my weight.
Yeah.
Definitely doing that. So there was still a lot of disordered behaviors. I was still in therapy on and off. If I'm not mistaken, I believe that was around the time I started medication, antidepressant medication, which I'm always very open about to help release the stigmas around mental health. So there were a lot of things going on, in my life at that time. And, I just wanted to I wanted to try to understand still what I thought was, in quotes, wrong with me. I thought that there was just something that if I could just get to the root of it, if I could just get to the root with what is wrong with me, I will be so happy, and so I certainly, struggled for years with depression. And looking back, I absolutely should have been medicated in high school and was not. And I would have had probably much, much healthier and happier experience had I been. But it was not an option. It was not even on my radar at the time. My mother felt very strongly, even though she knew better, very strongly about medication. And, she didn't believe it in antidepressants. So, her feeling was, well, you just have to kind of dust yourself off, and so very different belief system. And part of that, again, was cultural. But she did advocate for therapy, and she did take me and she supported that, but she did not support medication. But I needed it.
Yeah.
I absolutely needed it and have been on it, on and off throughout my life. No shame whatsoever. And it's helped me,
Nice.
But so I think it was, from that, when I left OA and then before I found, intuitive eating, I think it was just a lot of like winging it, and again, using movement in a very disordered way, and just sort of hoping for the best.
Yeah. And so when did you find intuitive eating and how did that happen?
It happened in 2012. A couple of weeks ago, I was looking through Amazon for something, and I didn't realize that they had a history of all the things you bought, like from day one.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of looking around, and it's what I thought. I bought the intuitive eating book in 2012. So that with that order, I mean, it's amazing how much stuff they have online. I bought like 4 other books too, because I stumbled in quotes in the intuitive eating book, because I was getting other diet books. And of course, intuitive eating is not a diet, but at the time, that's what I was looking for. And this book came up, and I said, oh, that looks interesting. And I said, you know what? I added it to my cart, and I got the book. And I said, this is not possible. It's not possible. And I went so far as to say, this is not possible for me. They have no idea how much food I can consume. So this is a really nice idea, but not going to work for me.
Yeah. And did you then think, maybe I should give this a try? Or it's just like, these guys do not know about my situation. Like, this isn't even going to fly. Like, I cannot even try this.
Yeah, it was a combo. It really was. But when I looked back at that order, I also had gotten the Health at Every Size book written by Linda Bacon, at the time, Linda Bacon. And I remember reading that book and throwing it across the room, literally, and saying, this is a crock, and there's no way that this research is accurate. Who are these people? So I put the book away. After throwing it across the room, I put the book away because I said, this is crazy talk. And then I read all my other books that were talking about, weight being a spiritual issue and all of these other things. And so I was still very steeped in that kind of dogma from OA. And so I was just trying to find like a different approach to it, but like using that spiritual undertone, which there's nothing wrong with for anyone else. But for me, it wasn't working anymore. I needed something else. And so I just kept ordering these books because I was looking for an answer. How can I fix this? And so I read the intuitive eating book. And again, it was a much older revision than it is. And I just said, this is really lovely, but it's not going to work. And so, this was 2012. And I said, but wouldn't it be nice if it could work?
Okay.
Wouldn't it be nice if it could? And by that point, I already had my son, and I knew that he was getting older, and I wanted to model different behaviors for him.
Yeah.
I didn't want him to be stuck in, seeing me, or affected by seeing me have this really challenging relationship with food.
Yeah. And so what was your first experiences like when you did finally take the plunge?
I'm doing this wrong. I'm doing this wrong. And again, that's in quotes.
Yeah.
I felt there's no structure here. How can anyone follow this?
Yeah.
I need someone to tell me what to do. Because that's what I had been doing basically my whole life, is somebody, this many of this, not, you don't eat that, eat at this time. And so that's all I knew. And so for someone to say, oh, well, listen to your body and choose foods that you think are going to be satisfying for you. I was like, what are you talking about? This was a different language to me. This was completely different language to me. And it was very uncomfortable. And so I said, some voice inside kept saying to me, yeah, but what if it could work?
Yeah.
What if this could work for you? And what if you could have the freedom that they are describing in this book?
Yeah.
And at that time I was in my 40s, and I was in major transition in my life. I was in perimenopause. Nobody told me that. And my son was older, and I was starting to get very particular about the foods he was eating. And I was making him really anxious. And that made me very scared. And so I found a professional to help me with intuitive eating, because I said that there has to be a way, or I had hoped that there was a way for me to embrace these principles and to find something better for myself. And I decided that I would hire a professional who could help me. And that's what I did.
Nice. And you talking about your son and noticing the anxiety you were creating with him, and wanting to model something different for him than you had been. Like I know for lots of clients, that's a big pull of just like, I don't want to have history repeat itself. I know exactly what my parents taught me, and I don't want to be passing that on. And also if like you'd had the experience for the previous, 20, 25 years that you've been struggling with this thing, you're like, I don't want to be giving this to my child.
Right. And
so,
I'm sorry.
No, go on.
No, I'm just saying we've since, thank goodness, repaired that relationship in terms of food. And we still to this day laugh about white rice, because that was like something, don't eat white rice. And I would attach all of these negative things to eating white rice. And now we still laugh when we order Chinese and he orders white rice, and it's just like, he's like, Mom, remember? And my son is 20. Mom, remember when you wouldn't let me? And I was like, yes, honey, I remember. It's like, and now we laugh about it, but I realized that it could have gone a very different way.
Yeah. Oh, totally. I mean, look, my background is studying as a nutritionist, and if I didn't go down this path, I could also see it going a very different way with my son. He's very much a picky eater, and it's interesting in terms of like the way that we navigate that. And I'm very just very relaxed about it, of just like, you know what, he's getting what he needs. It's way better that he has a good relationship with food, and the meal times aren't fraught. It's like, let's focus on what's actually really important here. And I know that it could have looked very differently if I had studied just nutrition and then had not gone down this intuitive eating path.
Exactly. And the same thing could have happened to me because I first became a health coach.
Yeah.
And so that was all about, eat organic and eat this, eat that. And that was really when things I would say dialed up for me. And also at that time, my mother was very, very ill with cancer and has since passed. But so I became like hyper focused on, cancer is all over my family. So I really have to be extra careful because of my genetic footprint. And so, all of that transferred to him. And of course, I was just trying to be, in quotes, a good mother.
Yeah.
But what was happening was my child was already starting to develop these behaviors that were very filled with stress and anxiety around food. And I would see that he would, do things like hide things from me. Yeah. And so when I got more into intuitive eating and I went, I really left the whole, health coaching thing behind, except for the coaching skills that it taught me. Yeah. I elevated myself and said, this is not what I want to do. Coaching, yes, but not telling people what to eat or how to eat. And that was around the same time I was introduced to intuitive eating. So, and at the time I was a vegetarian. Yes. So, I look back 10 years and it was a really complicated time in my life because I was also getting off of a booster medication for my antidepressant. And that booster medication had a huge impact on my weight. And so my body completely between, getting into intuitive eating and giving myself full permission, getting off of the medication, my body was going through so many changes at the same time. And I just give myself a hug and say, girl, you made it. You made it. You worked your butt off to really make this relationship one that is filled with love and compassion instead of self-loathing. But it was a rocky time. It was a really rocky time. But you know what, Chris, I'm grateful for it all.
Totally. And I can see how one could then be like, I'm letting myself go. Like I've been prioritizing health and now what am I doing? Like you could see it through this complete other lens where it was about like self-flagellation and that type of thing. But for you to be able to really embrace it and see this is a really positive thing. This is something that I've struggled with for decades and I'm now finally making inroads into getting to a better place. Like I think that's hugely positive.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think for a lot of people that, the beginning can be a little bit rocky for a lot of people. And let's face it, learning to trust our body is not an easy process. Yeah. But it's absolutely possible. I believe it's absolutely possible. And sometimes we just need someone to hold our hand through it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so how long did it take for you? And I know like this is one of those things where how long is a piece of string because there's different things that occur at different points. But for you to go from like complete intuitive eating novice to it suddenly to it feeling like, okay, this is just me doing this pretty much on autopilot and I'm on board with all the 10 principles and I feel like I'm doing this. Like how long did that transition take?
If I'm honest, I would say I started to feel like it was getting easier probably into my 6th month.
Okay.
I felt after a year that I was more on autopilot, like, oh, okay, I'm asking myself what I want to eat. I'm giving myself that full permission. I'm not, stressing as much. I was still adjusting to my new body. Yeah. And that took longer, but the food part and being able to embrace the majority of the principles, I would say 6 months, to a full year, before I felt like, I think I'm getting this. I think I'm really understanding. And I didn't feel as fearful about the, in quotes, lack of structure. That became very normalized for me. I was like, oh yeah, this is just the way I eat now, and that was I started to feel freedom, in terms of my eating, which was really nice.
Yeah. And I also would add, like, I think there's this misconception with intuitive eating that there is no structure. And I don't actually think that needs to be the case. Like, I think I'm a very intuitive eater, but I eat my breakfast at roughly the same time every day. I eat a snack at roughly the same time. I eat my lunch. Like there is structure that is built in by just knowing, okay, this is when I tend to get hungry now.
Yep,
and I think
exactly.
that gets easier as time goes on because you're better regulated with those things. And in the early stages, when you do give yourself full permission, you can eat a meal and then an hour later you're still hungry or hungry again. But I don't think that intuitive eating has to mean no structure. And I know that's not what you're saying, but I just want listeners to really understand this because I think that is a common misconception.
100% agree. I mean, and my breakfast I usually have around the same time, give or take. And also, I wouldn't say that I eat the same things over and over again, but in terms of like what's on my plate, I do have a nice variety of things. And I have noticed, over time that my body does do better when I have a nice variety of various things on my plate. And, in the beginning, that was not always the case because like many people, I was refeeding.
Yeah.
I was bouncing all over the place with diets and with, binging and with restricting. So of course, the things I hadn't been eating, I wouldn't give myself permission to eat. I was eating in abundance, which is completely natural. Yeah. But, when I finally understood what, and really embraced the principles, things were very, very different. And I felt like isn't this the way everybody eats? And I just felt very comfortable and I felt in quotes normal. I felt this is very natural. And that feeling of this is natural was very such a relief for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would imagine it was a very gradual process. I know with
Absolutely.
clients, there's less of the aha moments and more of just I've noticed that I haven't done that thing for the last month. And you just become aware because things have started to happen repeatedly and it just feels normal, or things that you were doing have now stopped and you notice that they're now absent and you're not longing for that thing, or that's not a challenge that thing's no longer happening. And it just, it can sometimes feel glacially slow, but in the whole scheme of things, when you say I had a struggle with food that lasted, 25 years to, in a lot of ways, overcome that in a year, that is a pretty quick transition.
Yeah. And you know what? I don't think we ever arrive. I think we are always learning. We are always learning. And I feel like my relationship and my practice gets stronger and stronger, and I feel that really strongly. People are like, oh, how long does this take? And I'm like, well, we're always given opportunities to learn about our bodies, but when I say that I feel like it took 6 months to a year, and that where I was able to embrace and be like, these principles are the way that I want to continue living my life. And that was huge, and again, that like you're describing, it was, slower, I guess, because people are so used to diets getting these quick results with, of course, very dismal long-term returns. But it was just this ease, much more ease. And when I was able to keep things in the house without thinking about them or obsessing about them. And sometimes like I'd keep ice cream in the freezer and it would be freezer burned.
Yeah.
Because I had completely forgotten that it was there. Back in the day, that was not possible because I would eat it in one sitting. So, things like that. It was just like, oh, that's interesting. Look at that. Wow.
Yeah. And you said that the body acceptance or body image or that piece took longer. And I know this is a very open-ended question, but what did that look like? What was helping you actually get to a better place with that?
Well, certainly befriending my body after decades of self-loathing with food and things like that sort of helped me to realize that being a friend to myself instead of being not so nice was going to help me in terms of accepting my body.
Yeah.
And of course, our bodies change and they're supposed to change. And that's one of the things I talk about all the time with my clients, especially, for midlifers. And I do have some clients that are not midlife, but, even with younger people, our bodies change, and I keep reminding myself of that and understanding that in that spirit, things are going to shift around a little bit. And, how can we just make this easier, and how can you be nicer to yourself, and how can you support your body? What other things can you do to support your body as it's just going through life, and that's sort of the way I go through. And I'm not thinking about that all the time because I'm human. I can't always be that dialed into it. But most days I'm asking my body continually, what do you need right now?
Yeah.
How can I support you? And that, that relationship between myself and my body has just, as a result, has gotten much, much stronger and much more loving and much more compassionate.
Nice. Yeah. And I think that regular reminder of like, how can I support you? Even if you're not consciously asking yourself that, even if that's just, oh, I recognize I'm hungry. Okay, cool. I'm going to go and eat. Like that's my body telling me what it needs in that moment. Or I'm kind of feeling pretty tired at the moment. Yeah. Tonight I'm actually not going to go for that swim and I'm just going to have an early night or whatever it may be. But just doing things where you're like, I'm getting this feedback from my body and I'm going to honor the information that it is giving me.
Right. And, you said that is the feedback. It's like when I was in, dieting world and my relationship with my body and food were so archaic, dialing into my body was something I didn't have any idea what that even meant because everything was coming from outside of me. Yeah. And, flipping, being able to go into this new world of intuitive eating and body acceptance is really all about going inward. Yeah. And like you said, you may not be consciously asking the question, but all of a sudden your body is throwing hunger cues and you're like, oh, I'm hungry. Yeah. And then what are you going to do about it? Are you going to honor it? Are you in a position where you're able to feed yourself at this time, or caring for yourself and, maybe you can't eat for several hours. And so you take care of yourself and you have something to tide you over, and just those things, those compassionate responses that help your body to be in a better position, for you to thrive and for you to feel better.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And so I think it would be good to have a bit of a chat about some of the training that you've done. Like I know you said that you did some health coaching and then wanted to continue on with coaching, but in a different way. And obviously intuitive eating was a big part of that. And so, yeah, some of the trainings that you've done that I imagine were both helpful for you personally in your journey, but also were then going to be useful with working with clients. So yeah, I want to go through that. But just before we do that, you've talked a little about the clients that you work with, but just so I know and listeners know more, like who do you work with? What are they wanting help with? What is it about you and what you offer that you think resonates with people? Just so, yeah, we get a sense of who it is you're helping.
Yeah, I mostly work, most of the women that are attracted to my work are midlife, or a little bit earlier. Some, midlife is a weird thing because everyone sort of says it's a different age bracket. I typically categorize it between like 45 to 65, but some people, say 50 and older. If a client is funny.
Sorry, just to interrupt. It is kind of funny if someone's saying midlife at 50, it's like your expectation is now that you're living to 100.
Exactly.
So I do think I'm 40 now and I'm like, I'm at midlife or thereabouts.
Right. Yeah. So it's, I say I tend to work with women that are 45 and over, but I've worked with women who are 65, or 70, but I've also worked with teenagers. So that's pretty rare, but I've worked with women in their 20s. So it depends. I mean, I think sometimes younger people are coming to me because they're looking for more of like a mother figure. Maybe their mother is not accepting of their desire to try something different and they're very stuck in diet culture. But most of the women that are coming to me are usually 45 and older, and they are looking for someone who has been through a lot of the stuff that happens at this period of life, this stage of life, and who has come out on the other side, and so and I also speak very, very openly about, the the struggles that I had in perimenopause and menopause. And now that I'm through that, it's like, what's life like on the other side? And so, many of them have already stopped menstruating. So they're post menopause. And so this is a whole different part of their lives that they're exploring, and it's very new to them. And so they like to talk to someone who understands, and they like to speak to somebody who is very open about it, because they feel like many of their friends don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
They have a lot of shame about their body changing. They think that there's something wrong with them because their body is changing, and they need to speak to somebody who's not speaking that way, because they need to be validated and they need to understand that I really want to try this different path, but no one in my inner circle is doing this. And so I need someone who can help me to see that this is okay for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Then that makes complete sense. So with the intuitive eating, so I know you've done the certified intuitive eating coach training. Mm-hmm. What did you get out of this that you either didn't know about intuitive eating before or wasn't in the book, or what was the benefit you got from this training?
The training was wonderful, and certainly working with Elise and Evelyn was, a huge piece of it. Because you do have to go through some supervisory training after, and it really was helping to solidify the principles, helping to see some of the pitfalls. Like as an example, people making intuitive eating into a hunger fullness diet. That's a very common thing that people struggle with. Really helping to understand the role that satisfaction food satisfaction plays in all of this. And of course, working through supervision was which of these principles are you still struggling with? And so it was an opportunity really to do some deep diving on some of the areas that were still kind of fuzzy to me, and where I still felt like, even though I thought I had embraced them, the training really uncovered some areas that it didn't make me feel very comfortable. And so I was like, let's explore those. And so continuing to peel back those layers and doing it with two professionals that have seen a lot and who are both very loving and compassionate was a great experience for me.
Yeah, nice. Well, I've had both of them on the podcast. I think both of them I've had on twice. Mm-hmm. And so I'm a big fan, and I am in agreement with satisfaction. I think is often the missing part that people don't get, or really is the glue that holds many of the other principles together.
Yes.
And so it is one of the areas I focus a lot on with clients. I've done a whole podcast episode all about satisfaction, because I think if you can truly get that, then a lot of the other stuff kind of falls in line.
Yes. Agreed. Yeah. It was great training, and it really opened me up to a whole nother world that I didn't know existed, because again, in health coaching, which was, a rigorous year of training, we didn't tell them exactly, to diet, but you were exposed to literally 100 different diets. Yes. So it was a complete reversal of that. So again, I learned a lot of coaching skills from there. No regrets at all. It was part of my journey, but in terms of the dogma around, what they taught, that's not at all what I do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, same with my nutrition training. There is a lot that I'm very appreciative of for going through that. And I understand physiology and things that I didn't understand before, and was really my gateway into getting
exactly.
I didn't have a huge science background. I didn't do any sciences as part of my last couple of years at school. And so, I'm really grateful for it, but I disavowed a very high percentage of what was
Yes. I've heard that a lot.
Yeah. And then I know you did the Playing Big facilitator training with Tara Moore. So what were some of the skills that you learned as part of that training?
That was an experience. That was a wonderful 6-month experience. Tara Moore is a very gifted author and facilitator, and she just is all about helping to see the world differently, and how to empower, other women, and just through her process or her, her writing, she's able to do that. And she's a very, very gifted coach. But what I really took away from that, I had heard of the inner critic before,
yep.
but not to the extent that she talks about it and how it, really just infiltrates so many areas of our lives. I just didn't have that kind of language or knowledge before. I'd heard people talk about the inner critic, but not to the extent that she did. And she really dissected it. So we learned, what's the voice of the inner critic? All that self-doubt that you may be having is the inner critic, and the reasons why it shows up, and, how to compassionately work with the inner critic instead of against the inner critic, and understanding that it's really just this very vulnerable side of ourselves that is afraid. And so it really, for me, it helped to tie in the compassion piece also. Yeah. And so she just really spoke to me on so many levels. There were many, many other things, and also helping us to see that on the other side of fear and self-doubt, there is this intuitiveness inside of us that we can choose to dial into at any time. And so, of course, I knew that from intuitive eating, but this was next level. And so it really, again, brought all of that together for me. And I was like, this is a beautiful pairing with my other training. So that was a wonderful experience.
Nice. And look, I've heard Brene Brown talk a lot about the inner critic. I've heard Kristen Neff talk a lot about self-compassion, and they're the two people who come to mind when you talk about it. But there's something about doing a program where someone is like, okay, there is this 6 months and we're going to be doing this thing and then this thing and this, where it's so much more structured than just reading a book, and where you're learning how to use this thing in a very practical and pragmatic way. And if it's geared towards someone who is a coach, and how do I bring this into the coaching realm? I think there is so much that you can gain from that. And especially with the inner critic, I think a lot of people, when you talk about that, they're like, but I don't really have, I don't notice that I'm criticizing myself. And I don't think it's just that. There are these beliefs that are in that subconscious, which is part of the inner critic, which is having an impact here.
Exactly. And the subconscious piece is huge. And also she brings in the piece about that women are wired this way to doubt themselves because of decades where they couldn't speak.
Yeah.
They weren't allowed to have property. They weren't allowed to have credit. They weren't allowed to have any of these things. And if they spoke up, there was potentially a huge price to pay, including divorce, homelessness, and things that nobody really wants to experience. And so she helped us to see that, this is not just something that started with us.
Yeah. This
is something that is here. And of course, men have inner critics too, but I think it's something that most would agree. This is something that this is a real problem for women, the self-doubt and just apologizing and just, not feeling like they are, that they measure up, you know? And so she helped us really to see in the ways that our society continues to perpetuate this.
Yeah.
And she does it in such an eloquent way. And she's just very equitable. She's just really I can't say enough good things about her. She's a lovely, lovely person.
Nice. Well, just on that point of how it's been conditioned into women, I've just started watching Mad Men, and I know I'm very behind the curve on this because it came out so long ago. But
I haven't seen it either, so don't. But you're not.
It's set in the 60s, and it's actually very difficult to watch because it's so cringeworthy in terms of how women are treated, how Black people are treated. It's so hard to watch, and I'm constantly asking myself, was it really like this? And undoubtedly it was, because they've done the research with this. And I started reading a book called The Carpetbaggers by a guy called Harold Robbins, and I'd never heard of him before. I heard a marketer years ago talk about how he likes the books, because the guy's a really incredible writer, and I think he was a writer in the 60s. But I'm having the exact same experience with the book, where it is just this very outdated ideas around gender and men's places and women's places in society. And so just those two things in very recent memory are having an impact on how I'm thinking about this.
It's interesting because I have not seen this series, and one of the reasons why I haven't is because of what you're describing. Because I've heard that it's so cringeworthy. I know that it's going to trigger me so much. So I am like, I'm not so sure about that. But I mean, even I was just reading something today about. In the States, you may have it over in the UK. Ellen DeGeneres' show is coming to an end, and she was describing how far she's come, because in the latter part of the 90s, when she came out, the network canceled her show. Yeah. And it's just so interesting to see how we have progressed, because now, speaking of LGBTQ on television or anywhere else is fairly commonplace. So we are evolving, thank goodness. But the 60s was a rough time. And I don't know that I could watch the whole thing.
Yeah, I'm watching it because I went to dinner with a number of friends, and they kind of listed it as their favorite show. Yes. And this was both men and women. Mm-hmm. And apparently the arc that the main character takes is very interesting. And so I think it's kind of set with this backdrop. But yeah, I will TBC of how this how it ends.
You've intrigued me because I've heard only good things. So we'll see. I'll let that simmer for a while.
Yeah, and then I also know you've done, or you maybe are continuing to do, mentorship with Summer Innanen, and I've had Summer on the show a number of times. I've had many conversations with her outside of the podcast. I'm a huge fan of her and her work. And so what are some of the ideas or the wisdom, or what are the things that you've taken from Summer?
Well, Summer's someone I had followed for years, and I put her up on this pedestal. And then one day I got an email saying that she was offering mentorships. And I was like, I have to do this, even though she was like, she's like, I can't talk to Summer. I was like fangirly type of a thing. And then when we talked on the phone, I told her that, and we both laughed, and we just got along really well. So I adore her. I consider her a friend. She's a mentor. I learned so much from her. I mentored with her, and I continue to have check-in sessions with her. She really helped me to incorporate a lot of the Tara Moore work into body image. Okay. So, because she had also taken the Tara Moore course years ago, and she was actually the person that I heard about the program, and I had kind of tucked it away in the back of my head. And then when I was ready for it, I decided to take the plunge. So, among many other things, Summer helped me to cross that bridge over, okay, how do I take all of these wonderful tools? And I was using some of them, but it was like very choppy. She helped me to really bridge the gap, and how could I incorporate more of this into my coaching? And so, like I said, it was that among many other things, but that was a big piece of it for me. And also helping me to understand the importance of helping clients and giving me support and more tools around helping clients feel they're feeling safely, and the importance of doing that in terms of body neutrality. And just because people are in general very afraid of feeling their feelings. And I understand that. And so, how can I do this safely where it's still within my scope of practice? Yeah. I'm very, very conscious of that. And so, she helped me to gather some tools to do that. And it's made a huge difference for my clients and for myself too. So can't say enough good about Summer. Just adore her.
Nice. And I think that's a really important piece in terms of helping people to be able to sit with difficult emotions and to be able to understand how to process that. And I think even as a practitioner, I remember an email that someone had sent about this, and it was a really great one where she talked about, as a practitioner, often when someone is talking about how much they're struggling with their body or they're struggling with eating or whatever, the natural reflex is to point out all of the good things about what they have going for them or all the improvements they've made or whatever. And it's not that can't be part of it, but allowing them to sit in that difficult, uncomfortable place and being able to explore that, as opposed to constantly trying to just sweep it under the rug or be like, oh, but look at all of the silver linings of this thing.
Right. That toxic positivity is really, I could use a very colorful word, but I won't. We do need to feel. And, the reality is that it does help us to neutralize, but it also takes some of that fear away from feeling, is knowing that we can get through it. It's a muscle that we have to continue to strengthen if we choose to. And of course, we always have a choice here. But to me, recovery really is not possible unless we start to slowly and gently, and preferably with support, if that is an option, working through those things, because the feelings will continue to come up. They will, and they will have a different face, but they will come up. And, the more we can start to get to the root and neutralize that in a safe manner, that's when we can really start to see the possibilities for ourselves.
Yeah, and it's just the importance of validation as part of that.
Yes, absolutely.
Of having someone be like, you know what, that sucks. Like, I'm really sorry you're going through this, and let's talk more about this, as opposed to trying to ignore that situation or trying to just constantly point out the bright spots. Yeah.
The other thing I think too that's important is that Summer talked about, quite a bit, which was so helpful, was to continue to help clients to identify the emotion and stop using the fat phobic language, because it's always, oh, I'm so this, but that's really not what it is. It's something else underneath that. It could be a host of emotions underneath that, and helping them to identify what they are. And then, of course, grieving. I did another mentorship with Brianna Campos last summer that also was really eye-opening, because she's coming from body image as a therapist and as an educator, but also is a woman in a larger body.
Yeah.
And so she's talking about the grief. Yeah. And that's her main, of course, she does it all, but her thing is body grief. And so learning about it from that point of view was, there is grieving. There is grief when the body is changing, especially, at many stages, but specifically for women in midlife, there is generally significant changes that happen, not just hormonally, but to the body and how things, start to shift. Yeah. And that's very hard for a lot of people. And so having that training too was really helpful. How do we sit with that grief together?
Nice. Well, thank you for mentioning that, because I recently read or listened to on Audible Brené Brown's Atlas of the Heart, which I thought was an incredible book. It looks at all of the different emotions that one can feel, what they look like, what it's connected to. And so it gives someone a real language to be able to identify what the emotions are. And she had quite a section on grief. And it made me think of, like, I really need to get someone on the podcast who is really quite an expert on grief to talk about it. And from the body grief perspective, but also the fact that I'm working with lots of clients who are older, who are losing parents and who are dealing with grief of losing a loved one. And I think that's something that I don't have any personal experience with, and is something that I want to explore more. And I recently read Joan Didion's A Year of Magical Thinking, which is all about her, the year after losing her husband. And I thought that was an incredible book, but grief is a topic that I haven't touched at all really on this podcast, and is something that I want to cover. So yeah, thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah, that was I just recently added that to my website because I had remembered that, oh, I forgot about Brianna, and she's great. But grief is big. And when I mention the word grief sometimes to clients, they're like, oh, wow, I hadn't thought about it that way.
Yeah.
And they are like, a light bulb goes off, and they, of course there's stages, and they transfer to the body and how we feel about it. And it's eye-opening for people to realize this is a real thing.
Yep.
And just like, we have to grieve when someone passes, we have to grieve that our body is changing and that we're moving into a different stage of life. And with that, there are a lot of things that are not necessarily going away, but are changing. Relationships are changing. Like the relationship I have with my son has dramatically changed. I'm grieving that too. Yeah. So there's a lot of things, and it's changing. It doesn't mean that it's bad. It's just different.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think
it's different.
That was one of the real takeaways from Atlas of the Heart was just the importance of being able to label an emotion and the ability that then gives you. And so in your example, being able to say, oh, that is grief. And then someone being able to say, oh, okay, that makes sense. Let me understand grief more so I can understand my experience here. But if someone only has the capacity to label 3 emotions, and that's basically what Brené talks about, that's most people can do, happy, sad, and mad.
Right.
It really is then a block in being able to really understand the nuance of what one is feeling.
Right. Agreed. I haven't read that. I haven't listened. I also listen to books, and it's on my list. So maybe I'll bump it up a few notches because it sounds wonderful. It
is. Yeah, it is. It is a really good one. And so, talk about like ageism or age discrimination and how this features in your work with clients. Because I imagine, given the population that you serve, that this is something that comes up a lot in conversation.
Definitely. I think people are ageist against themselves, and they really are. And so myself included at times, I think it sometimes can be, we see ageism, it's very subtle, but it's there. And I learn a lot from people that, who are in that sort of area. And I know, her name escapes me right now. Glennon Doyle's podcast just had on she had a whole episode about ageism. And then she did a whole bunch of things about menopause, because I think that's the phase of life that she's in now. She's actually peri. Yeah. And so, just hearing these things really makes you become very aware of, wow, this is really here, and people are just so subtle about it, but you feel it. And now I'm much more aware. So that makes me grateful that I have the tools now to be like, what am I listening for? Yeah. But for the people that the population of women that I'm working with at an older age, it gets a little bit harder because they've had these beliefs for so long. Yeah. So there's decades that they have to unpack for themselves. And it doesn't necessarily take longer for them to embrace the principles. But like I said, there are decades, these beliefs have been sitting around for a while. So it might take them a little bit longer to feel that freedom that they're craving, but not always.
Yeah. And are there like particular topics or conversations that you're having a lot connected to menopause, whether that's leading up to menopause, post-menopause, and this can be about particular experiences, or it can just be about helping clients better understand their body? Like what are some of the things that you're regularly chatting about?
Well, the regular conversation, and one is around their bodies and just how it's changing, and they feel often that it's their fault, and that they're not, eating properly, whatever that means. And, that their bodies shouldn't be doing this, and it never did this before. And so that is sometimes hard for people to really, some of course come with a long history of dieting, but I do have some every once in a while that have never had a problem. and don't have a long history. And now they're really struggling to accept that their body is different.
Yeah.
And that they're not able to work out to make it look a certain way, that it just isn't responding in the same way. And so that's been hard for them. So definitely just they're changing bodies and understanding what's actually happening.
Yeah.
And the reasons why their, fat is now shifting into different areas of the body, as a protective measure. Yeah. And so helping them to understand that. And of course, I always refer them to Margot Main's work. And so, that is very helpful for them and helping them to see that, and also helping them to understand, what happens during this phase in terms, to the best of my knowledge, and again, staying within my scope of practice, but what happens to our bodies when the hormones, fluctuate, drop, and then pretty much completely go away. Yes. So what that does, not just physically, but also emotionally, and how that can affect their mental health. Because one thing that's not talked about often enough is the impact of, the diminishing estrogen in terms of depression, anxiety, and all of those types of things. Very, very important that women understand that they're not going, in quotes, crazy. There is a reason why they may be, especially if they had a predisposition to these things in the past, why these things why they may be on the uptick.
Yeah.
And again, just educating them, because to me, education is really one of the ways to help people to understand, again, if they're open to it, and not to feel so alienated, like there's something wrong with them, because there isn't.
Yeah. And I think it's like that mental health piece is super important, because at that time of life, there can be other factors that then come in and make it look like that's the thing that's happening, i.e. like a child is then going off to college, or there's a selling of the house, or that there's changes that are happening, and then it just gets, maybe you're just having a tough time accepting that, as opposed to, no, there's been a real fundamental change in hormonal levels in the body, and that's what is now driving this change in anxiety or depression or whatever it may be.
Absolutely. And like I said earlier, that nobody explained to me in my 40s, I was in the midst of perimenopause, and I really was struggling with my mental health at the time. And I am great now, and I have been off meds for many years, and I feel probably the best I've felt in a long, long time. But at that time, nobody said to me, this may be happening. You may be feeling this pressure, or this uptick again in these old behaviors or feelings because of the hormone changes. No one said that to me. And so I've been on multiple podcasts talking about this, because people need to be aware of it. Yeah. And I don't think that medical professionals, they're always like, it's just like you said, they kind of like minimize, and they do not really speak to the hormonal piece of it. And so that bothers me, because it's not fair, because they're not looking at the whole picture.
Yeah, totally. And it also, just in connection to something you also said there, in terms of the fact that I used to be able to work out, and now even if I'm working out, my body doesn't look the same as it did, and I'm having fat go to this region and that didn't used to happen. Mm-hmm. I think, again, normalizing that and saying like that's a part of aging. And I think it is so challenging that what is presented in the media is either very young people who have not gone through that, or older people who have, but for some reason have been able to maintain a body that is similar to that of a younger person. Mm-hmm. And that they are then thought of like, that is just the norm. That's what should happen as you age. And it's like, no, you really are not going to look like the person who is 16 is on TV, because that's just not very realistic for the population at large.
That's right. And again, like you said, it's normalizing these things because we're not told this. And, it's so because we're not, we think that there's something wrong. And it's challenging enough time for all the reasons we've said. And then on top of it, you feel like there's something wrong with your body and that you're doing something wrong. So it's really a recipe for feeling crummy. And, nobody really wants to do that. So I just feel like the more people know about what is happening during that period from perimenopause on, it can just be very helpful.
Yeah.
Because it is a process and it can take a number of years. So understanding what is your body going through and then doing your best to support it the best that you're able to at that time, and get support wherever you need it. If that's just, a Facebook group that talks about menopause, whatever it is, it helps, because to feel alone during that time is not fun, because I did it and it was really, really hard.
Yeah, totally. And I also think the added piece here can be, if someone is starting intuitive eating for the first time around menopause, then you have changes that are connected to food freedom and changing the way you're eating, as well as changes that are connected to menopause, and kind of understanding how those two things are having an impact on the body. Because again, if you're listening to a podcast where there's someone who's in their 20s talking about their experience of intuitive eating, your experience might not stack up, because they haven't dealt with the hormonal changes that you're now dealing with.
Exactly. And that's another, you had asked earlier about, the population that I'm serving. And a lot of times, like I said, women are coming to me because they want to speak to somebody who, in quotes, gets it, but also because so many people that are doing this work are on the younger side.
Yeah.
And so, it's hard for them to identify. They're like, oh, they're so great. They give so many tips, and whatever, help me reframe this, but they don't understand what I'm going through.
Yeah.
And so I understand that, so it makes a big difference, and everybody has gifts to share, and right now my age is really helping me in a lot of ways. I mean, some of the other things that come up in conversation is the constant discussions about, correlation, not causation, because at this age, also with the hormone change, there sometimes people will be diagnosed with something, a chronic thing like type 2 diabetes or heart disease or something like that, which is not uncommon when there's this hormone change. And so they're thinking, what am I doing wrong? And so helping them to really wrap their brain as much as they possibly can around the correlation piece of it, and also to help them understand what's their genetic background.
Yeah.
Because people are not considering that enough. And I think that that's really important. Of course, it doesn't mean that just because you have X in your background that you are destined to get it. But it's important to know what the history is if you have it available to you.
Yeah. Totally. And I think you can then help people to be rational and understand, like, what are the things that I can genuinely do to help with this thing? And what are the things that really are out of my control? Mm-hmm. And being able to explain that in a way, like a lot of the clients I'm working with who are struggling with eating disorders, when we're talking about bringing in this food or that food, they'll be like, oh, but I heard that one's associated with diabetes. I'm pretty blunt. I'm like, you have an eating disorder. Like the most important thing that you can do for your health is not have an eating disorder. And so the fact that this food might be slightly associated with diabetes is like pales in comparison to the thing that is most important for you right now. And so I think being able to have conversations where you're able to look at, okay, what are the things that are realistic and you can do here that are going to be helpful, and what are the stuff that is like, yeah, that's just very diet culture-y stuff that actually doesn't have much scientific validation to back it up. And yeah, I wouldn't be spending your time focusing on or trying to change that habit or that thing, because you're not going to see much of a benefit from it.
Exactly. And thank goodness they have you. Thank goodness they have you to tell them that.
Yeah. And so what about exercise? So for me and the clients I work with, exercise is such a complicated thing. And so I imagine that it probably is for the clients that you are working with. So what are the challenges that are coming up or are most common with your population?
Yeah, movement exercise is very often another fraught relationship. And sometimes, I'll have clients that will come to me, they've worked through the principles and they're working on body image. Exercise still eludes them.
Yeah.
They are just, every time they start to do it, they start slipping back into diet mentality. So I think it is a very common issue. Some of the things that I see happen very often are that all or nothing thinking, very rigid, which is leftover diet mentality, right? That just perfectionism about how much time they have to put into this, the frequency they have to do it, the specific types because this type is better than this type of exercise. And so all of this rigidity around just movement in general. And that's like one thing that I would say is probably one of the biggest concerns that clients come to me with. And also just shifting really from like having to make that shift from what the body, focusing on movement as a way to change the body.
Yeah.
As opposed to how am I feeling when I'm doing this movement?
Yeah.
And, going totally again from the outside to the inside, it's people like, well, I did that with food, but I'm not able to do it yet with movement. And I said, it'll come, there's some things around it that are a little bit, different. And I think also that they don't really see movement as a relationship, a lot of people, and they don't always see that, in order to have a healthy relationship with it, like they do with food and like they're probably, or in the process of doing with food in their body, it takes time and attention.
Yeah.
And it's not that they have to be like, I'm going to improve my relationship with, movement now, but just having some awareness around what it takes to have a healthy relationship. And that when we are paying attention and when we are more mindful, very often relationships will grow.
Yeah.
And that, that is, I believe, what people can experience with movement. But it does take some shifting that is a little bit different. And of course, permission not to exercise and to rest for some people because they compulsively exercise. There's a flip side, which you may see quite a bit with the eating disorders.
Yes. And this is the thing that a lot of what I'm working on is how to get someone from a place of compulsive exercise often to be able to take some time off so that they are able to get the rest and repair that is just so needed. And then they can start to rebuild a healthier relationship with food after, not with food, with exercise after that point. And
right.
Yeah, and I mean, I mentioned earlier about the satisfaction piece and that being so key with intuitive eating. And I think it holds true as well with movement. Like I'm so much when working with clients about how do we create a healthier relationship with exercise, it's how can we find things that you genuinely enjoy, that are fun ways of moving your body, that leave you feeling good after you've done them, as well as while you're doing them. And a lot of the time let's find things that are not connected to your eating disorder, because there's so much that is there in terms of numbers and amounts and so much connection that often it does take moving to something new that they haven't done before. And it's not to say that someone can't go back to something they previously did, but I think in the beginning, having some time away from that is normally important and necessary. But I think the fun and the joy piece is something I really try and focus on.
Agreed. And also, I think it's really important to say that, just like our relationships with food and our body are going to continue to change, so are our relationships with movement. So as an example, like things that I used to love to do years ago, like even in my 40s, I used to be an avid cyclist. And now I still cycle, but it's on a very different level.
Yeah.
I used to ride the roads, looking back, it was pretty dangerous, and by myself. And at the time I felt okay, but looking back, it's done. Now I have no desire to do that. I do like to cycle, but not, again, not at that same level and not just in the same way. And so I think and that's okay. That is very okay. I had a very different motivation back then. There was, I believe, if I'm honest, some disorderedness to it. Yeah. But now I see it as just very different. Now I just move my body, and I'm pretty continuously looking for things to challenge myself, but feel good at the same time, and not scare myself, but challenge myself a little bit. And it's fun. Yeah. And I enjoy it. And it's a huge part of maintaining my mental health for me. And so for me, it is, it's a game changer. Movement is essential for me.
Yeah. And I also think just a reevaluation of what we think of exercise. Like, I think some people have this idea that I have to be doing it for this amount of time or this level of intensity, or these things are considered exercise and these things aren't. And it can be something as simple as like going for a walk for 10 minutes
exactly.
Or doing some stretching and doing more like really yin yoga. And so I'm often really trying to get movement to be a way of having someone get back into their body. It's not about using energy or the amount of steps or a lot of the kind of tracking type things that people have been thinking about exercise and the way that they thought about exercise. But how do we help someone get back into their body? And again, like as you said, this is a process, and it doesn't necessarily happen on day one, but that's like the end goal of what I'm wanting to create.
Agreed. And I say it all counts.
Yeah.
Because people feel that, and that was part of that, what I was saying, the perfectionist, people think it has to look a certain way in order for it to be beneficial. That's just not true.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's if you are rebuilding this relationship, you need to just start with, what do I feel like doing?
Yeah.
And unloading the dishwasher, cleaning the house, mowing the lawn, gardening, all of that stuff is moving your body, all of it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think just to touch on the point you said earlier about like how things change with time, there's a great Dan Gilbert talk, who's a psychologist. It's like a TED talk of him talking about how terrible we are as humans at forecasting like how we will feel about some experience in the future, but also what we will like doing in the future. And that often in a decade's time, the things that we find amazing and that we think we'll be doing forever, in a decade's time, we're like, yeah, I'm just not into that thing anymore. And I think that's okay. And it's a lot easier for that to be okay when our identity doesn't get wrapped up in but I'm a runner, or I'm a this, or I'm a that.
Yes. Very, very good point. Are we being defined by these things that we're doing or not doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
Really important. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know you have a program called Joyful Movement at Last. And so I know we've touched on a lot of it already, but what else is included as part of that? What are you covering in it?
I help them to, thank you for mentioning it, first of all. But we go through this whole thing of what I call exercise resistance. Yeah. And what is it exactly that is holding you back? And we explore some of those things, because it's not lack of motivation. It's not because you don't care about your body. There are other things that are underneath all of that are putting up this brick wall for you. And oftentimes, it's things like I mentioned, perfectionism, and thinking it has to look a certain way in order for it to make a difference. And I help them to understand that we can strive for excellence. It doesn't have to be perfect. There is no such thing. And also how that mentality is really holding them back. And looking at overwhelm, because that's real, especially in the world right now. There is so much coming at us from every single direction, helping them to navigate overwhelm and really get to the root of what they want and how they can build some boundaries around some of that overwhelm so that they can do the things that they would like to do, that their heart is calling for them to do. So many people I've worked with really want to start moving, and they just feel stuck, like their feet are cemented to the ground.
Okay. Nice.
So it's some of those things. And then just, I wouldn't say goals, but setting some intentions about what would you like it to be like? And what are some of the things that may be getting in your way? And teasing some of that out, and also what are you not giving yourself permission to do? Like, are you not letting yourself rest? Are you thinking it needs to be a certain way? And just exploring all of those things. And it oftentimes opens things up for them where they realize that their expectations are very pie in the sky and that nobody could ever meet them. And so when they start to get more realistic, I'm going to go from working 7 days a week to why don't we just go for a walk around the block?
Yeah.
It totally changes the landscape and it becomes more attainable.
Yeah. Or I would add, I have some of the clients who are doing the things that they are aiming for as pie in the sky, and I can guarantee that it is not providing the results and the life that they imagine that it is going to be providing for them.
Yeah, good point. Good point. I think movement is, again, can be a very fraught relationship for some people. And when they are able to reconcile it, they are so happy. They're just like, wow, I didn't know movement could be this free and easy. And it's like, yeah, because, you took down all the rules and regulations around it, kind of like what you did with food. Amazing.
Yeah. Nice. And so the final question I want to ask, and I know we probably touched on some of this already, but what are some of the positives that you've experienced through aging or being older? And you can talk about this both as a practitioner, but also just as a human being.
Boy, aging, such a great word. I see aging as a privilege. I really truly do. I think I mentioned earlier that my father passed away, but I don't think I mentioned that he died when he was 47.
Wow.
So he died, very young. And so at my 50th birthday, I had a huge party and I said, I made it. I'm 50 and I'm by no means done, but I was so happy that I was able to reach that milestone of my life. And I get that it's just a number, but it was very significant to me. So I do think that aging is a privilege and I try to live my life in accordance with that. And I'm not saying it's always easy, but I do think the alternative, and that's not very appealing. So I feel blessed that I get to be here. I'm still here and I get to see my amazing son and I'm with my husband and my dog and just experiencing life. I think one of the advantages of aging also is that you can choose to do more of what you want in life. And I'm not saying those choices are always easy. And I recognize there is definitely some privilege there. Yeah. But, I think that, we can look at our lives and dream a little bit and say, I want more of that, or I want less of that. How might I be able to get there? Where might I be able to get some support, or who might I be able to speak to who might be able to help me, or what people can I listen to? What podcast can I listen to that is more in the direction I want to go? So I think we dream a little bit. I never think that we're too old to dream. And I also at this stage of my life have less concerns about what other people think. Yeah. And, that I'm sure we've all heard that from people, I'm not saying, again, I'm not at all implying that it's easy. And I know that I have a lot of tools at my disposal, but a lot of times I'm just like, okay, well, that's what you believe. And, that just tells me more about, your beliefs and your preferences and priorities and values in life. But that doesn't mean that I have to believe that way, or dress that way or act that way or anything. It just means that we're different.
Yeah.
And so caring less about that. And as far as my clients regarding aging, we just talk a lot about just softening and first of all, understanding what our beliefs are around aging. And, that do you think it's just going to be like this downhill decline, and so understanding what our beliefs are, they have a choice, of course, to rewrite those beliefs based on, what they would like it to be more like, or moving toward and doing things to move toward more of what they want again than less of what they want. And helping them to see also the role, because some clients also come to me, like I mentioned earlier, about having concerns about mobility later in life because they're not moving their bodies as frequently as they would like to be. And so working through some of those fears of, losing potentially losing independence and just bringing it back to today. And what can we do today? And like what you said, what can we control today? Because that's all we have.
Yeah.
All we have, so just helping them to see that what can we do now to the best of our ability when we are able to support our bodies in a loving, compassionate way.
Nice. Well, yeah, I really like all of that advice. And on the not caring so much or not caring about other people, I do think that is a learned skill. And so I don't think that's just a feature of that happens when you get older. I think that is, as you say, you need the tools to be able to start to learn how to practice that.
Yeah, I wish that I had, this is the thing. My mother would always say this, if I knew what I know now when I was younger, I agree with you. I think people can start to build these muscles much younger. You don't have to wait until you're older. This is, again, these are skills that can be learned at any age. And so people listening to you, people listening to other people, people getting coaching if they're able to, whatever it is, however you're getting support, listen to the support that you need, not the other stuff that's going down the road that most people are going down, which is not very helpful and just continues to perpetuate that there's something wrong with us. Listen to people that are empowering and are saying things that are lifting you up.
Yeah, totally. Well, look, Michelle, this has been just such a wonderful conversation. I'm really so grateful you've come on the show and you've been able to talk about your own experience and the work that you're doing with clients. Where can people go if they want to find out more about you?
Thank you so much for having me. This has been such a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. And I hope that the listeners have really taken some important things away just about their journey. They can find me at my name. My website is michelleviña-baltsas.com, all one word. I'm also on Instagram, Michelle Viña-Baltsas _coach. And I have a really nice ebook that that's just fresh. It's called The Body Compassion Guide, and it's 12 steps to help people in midlife and beyond embrace their bodies. So it's a lot of the things that we've talked about here and some other things too. So they'll have a link to that as well. And I hope that is another piece of support material that will help them in their journeys.
Nice. Well, yeah, I will put links to all of that, including the ebook, in the show notes. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been great.
Thanks, Chris.
So that was my conversation with Michelle Viña-Baltsas. It felt like we got to cover just so many areas. And for anyone in midlife, I would highly recommend checking out Michelle's work. I think it's relevant for everyone, but especially if that is the stage that you're at, I think Michelle has some very good information and wisdom to share on this. So I want to make a recommendation. And the recommendation is a podcast called Dissect. And the tagline for the show is a music podcast that examines a single album per season, one song per episode. And it's up to season 10 now. And season 10 is actually the only one that I've listened to. And this season isn't about a music album, but is about Bo Burnham's inside. So Bo Burnham is a comedian, a musician, a writer, and director. He first rose to popularity in the early 2010s via YouTube, releasing many comedy songs on his channel, and many of these went viral. He then produced a number of comedy specials, but in 2016, he stopped performing because he started to have panic attacks on stage. And much of what he has written about and sung about is about how the internet is changing us and the negative effects that it is having on our mental health. He actually directed and wrote a film called 8th Grade that I've previously recommended on the show that came out, I think it was in 2018, and it is an incredible movie, so I highly recommend checking that out. So his newest special, Inside, was created during the pandemic, and it's just him in this one room making the whole thing. And it was filmed across a year or 18 months, And it really just shows him kind of breaking down and becoming more isolated and disassociating. And so it's obviously a dark comedy, and it just creates this incredible tension, but there's also a lot of laughter. And so Dissect goes through the whole special scene by scene, analyzing it and explaining it in granular detail. And it kind of reminds me of being back in school where we would read a poem and I wouldn't necessarily think that much of it. And then we'd go back through it line by line and understand the metaphors and the motifs and the references. And by the end, I'd understand this poem in really great depth and I could see its kind of true genius. And I thought from the beginning, when I first watched Inside last year, that I really enjoyed it and I appreciated what it was doing and I got a lot of the messaging and what it was about. But now, having listened to this podcast, I just have so much more respect for it in terms of how it's been done as a special and from a movie perspective, but also in terms of the kinds of references that are in the songs that I may have understood at a surface level and now have even a deeper understanding of. So if you haven't seen Inside, I definitely suggest watching it and watching it first and then listening to the podcast. And if you have, then I would definitely check out the podcast. It's called Dissect and it's in the 10th season and it's called Dissecting Bo Burnham's Inside. So that is it for this week. As I mentioned at the start, I'm taking on clients. If you are in midlife and are dealing with an eating disorder or disordered eating, or you're wanting to start intuitive eating, or really any of the ideas that I cover as part of this show, then please reach out. You can go to 7-health.com/help, and there you can find out more information. So that is it. I will catch you next week with another episode. Take care.